everyone. My name is Max, the Technical Support Associate at Dubility, the makers of SurveyCTO. During data collection, there may be times where there is already a list of respondents for the project. You want to make sure specific enumerators interview specific respondents, or you want multiple forms completed for the same respondent. All of this and more is greatly facilitated by using the SurveyCTO case management feature. This webinar is a beginner's guide to case management, including the uses of case management, how to set it up, how to use it, and how to use it. This webinar is largely based on our support article series on case management, so it will roughly follow the same structure. But that support article series is not a prerequisite for this webinar. So even if you have never heard of case management, that's perfectly fine. At the end of this webinar, we will have a Q&A. So if you have questions on anything we have discussed, post it using the Q&A feature in Zoom, which you can find at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we will get to it at the end. I will answer questions about case management in SurveyCTO out loud, and my colleague, Marta, will answer other questions about SurveyCTO in the Q&A window. Feel free to post your questions to the Q&A as you think of them, and we will answer them at the end. If I am speaking too quickly, you can also use the Zoom chat to ask me to slow down. At the end, I will also share with you a list of resources so you can learn more about the features we have discussed, as well as a feedback form so we can get your thoughts on this webinar. We are also recording this webinar. That recording without the Q&A will be posted to the SurveyCTO blog within the next few days or so you will be able to rewatch this at any time. This webinar is brought to you by the Safe People and Data Initiative, where we work to adapt data collection methods from in-person interviewing to methods that protect everyone involved, providing the safest environment possible. We've had a few presenters in our webinar series who've come to speak to us how they're adapting their data collection. For example, we've had a webinar on the move to phone interviewing known as CADI, and CADI has become important to many users, is instrumental in our proposed approach to CADI in SurveyCTO. If you're able to contribute to the initiative in some way through offering resources for others, or if there's something you're interested in presenting, feel free to let us know. To learn more about the initiative, take a look at the website or get in touch with us via the email address on screen. There will be 4 main parts to this webinar. We'll start by explaining what cases are, what case management is in SurveyCTO, and briefly show you how it works. Next, we will show you how to create and manage cases from your SurveyCTO server console. Then we will demonstrate how enumerators use case management to collect data. Finally, we will talk about case management workflows, including how to update case data when a form instance is submitted to the server. We'll start with a general overview of case management. Let's start by taking a look at what cases look like. This is SurveyCTO Web Collect. We're using this for demonstration purposes, but our mobile app, SurveyCTO Collect, will look very similar. Normally, when enumerators go to fill out a form, they click Fill Blank Form, scroll to the form, click Fill Out. Then they can fill out the form and submit it to the server when they're ready. Then later, the data manager can review and export all collected data. However, there is another way to view and fill out forms. I'll just exit this form. In the main menu, there is another menu option, Manage Cases. I'll click that. This is an example of the case management table view in web forms. It looks very similar to SurveyCTO Collect. Here, we have a list of cases in rows. If I click on one, I see a list of forms associated with this case. I can go to one of the forms, click Fill Out, and the form opens from that case. When we submit this form instance, it will be associated with the case it was opened from, which we will discuss later. Once we are done, we can return to the case management menu. And we can either open that case again to complete the next form associated with that case, or continue to the next case and complete one of the forms there. Let's ask the obvious question. What is a case? The short answer, it can be anything. A case can be an individual respondent, a household, a farm, a business, or any other unit of observation. In that case management menu, we have a few different examples. Here we have a household with the label Devi family, where the case is a household. The case after that, the Singh family, is also a household. We also have a couple of different cases for small businesses and a case for a school. Each of these cases benefits in some way from case management, as opposed to just selecting them from a list within the form. Of course, these are just a few examples, since a case can be anything if it works well for your project. Also, this example combines different types of cases inside the same cases dataset, which you can do, but for most simple projects, enumerators will only be able to view a single type of case. Cases have lots of uses. They are great if you want an easy-to-view list of all respondents, you want to fill out multiple forms for a respondent, you want to assign specific cases to specific enumerators, and lots more. I'll show you some examples. For this case at the top, before even opening the form, we have some basic information about the household so the enumerator can get ready. For example, here we have the time the enumerator is supposed to call the head of the household, so we can check that without needing to open the form, and they have a rough idea of when they should get started. When we open that case, we can see that there are two forms assigned to this household, a form for week 1 and a form for week 2. We can complete the form for week 1 now and the form for week 2 next week. When the form is opened from a case, the unique identifier of the case is stored in the form as a field value. That way, you don't have to worry about the enumerator mistyping the unique identifier, since it is already saved in the form, which will make it easy to link the baseline and midline forms during data analysis. Here's another example. For this project, each case is going to be a small business. When we open the case, there are two forms, one for a manager and one for an employee. You could combine the two forms into a single form, but what if you don't know if the manager will be interviewed first or one of the employees? By dividing it into multiple forms, you give the enumerator more flexibility and they can perform the interviews in the preferred order without needing to jump around the form. Case management is also a great way to make sure enumerators only view the cases that are assigned to them. Here, there are only about 5 cases. But if we look at the original list of cases, it is a lot longer. Because all of the cases have been assigned to users, each enumerator will only be able to view the cases that are assigned to them. Not only does this make the case management view a lot cleaner with fewer cases to worry about, it also ensures enumerators only fill out forms for their own respondents. Also, of course, these are just a few examples. Feel free to use case management any reason if you think it would be great for your project. Also, by the way, if you ever want to quickly view the data in your case management server dataset on the Design tab, click the Edit button, and you'll be able to view its data as you can see here. Now that we understand what cases are, let's talk about how to create and manage your case management workflow. Cases are stored in a server dataset. Server datasets are tables of data stored on your SurveyCTO server that will be used for other forms in a process called preloading. For example, if you need to give the enumerator the phone number of the respondent so they know whom to call, that phone number can be stored in a server dataset. That way, that phone number can be preloaded by the form so the enumerator knows what phone number to call so they can speak with the respondent. If you're just getting started, the case management server dataset must have a dataset ID of cases. That will tell SurveyCTO that that is the server dataset for cases. In the server dataset, each row will be a case in the case management menu. So whenever you add a new row to the server dataset, that is a new case. The case management server dataset requires 5 columns: ID, label, form IDs, users, and roles. You can also have an optional 6th column, sort by. We will discuss the purpose of each column a bit later. Let's create a new case management server dataset. On the Design tab of your Server console, click a plus on the left and click Add Server Dataset. When you scroll down, you notice that the second tab is New Dataset for Cases, so I'll click that. As you can see, the dataset ID is automatically generated as cases, so SurveyCTO will know to use that for the list of cases. I'll click Create Dataset, and we're all set. The server dataset for case management has been created. If I click Edit, I can see it has all of the columns used in case management: ID, label, form IDs, users, roles, and sort by. Let's go over what each case property is for. Each case must have values for these three properties. First, we have the ID. This will be the unique identifier for each case, so each ID value in the case management server dataset should be different. The value of this property will be stored as a field value in the form, so it can be used to link different forms completed for the same case. We will discuss how that works a bit later. Next is the label. This will be the user-friendly name of the case that the enumerator can easily understand. For example, take a look at this case management server dataset on the right. The case on top has an ID value of HH-1001, but the case label is the name of the household, Devi family, which is much easier for an enumerator to understand at a glance. Finally, each case needs to have form IDs. This will be a comma-separated list of the form IDs of each form assigned to the case. As long as those forms are installed on the device, the enumerator will be able to open those forms from the case. There are three additional properties. These properties can be blank, but they can also really help your case management workflow. The users property will be a comma-separated list of users who can view that case. For example, on the right, we have an example of three cases. The top case has a blank users value, so all enumerators will be able to view that case from the case management menu. However, the second case has a value of enumerator 1, enumerator 2. So users will only be able to view that case when they are logged in as either the usernames enumerator 1 or enumerator 2. If I were to remove enumerator 2 from that list, then only enumerator 1 would be able to view that case. Next, we have the roles property. This is very similar to the users property, but checks the user role of the enumerator instead of their username. The enumerator will only be able to view that case if they are logged in as user that is assigned one of the user roles listed in the roles column, or if the roles column is blank for that case. For example, the third case in this server dataset has a roles value of district 1. This means that any user with the user role district 1 will be able to view that case. This can be used for assigning cases to groups of enumerators as opposed to individual enumerators. If both the users and roles columns are blank for a case, then all enumerators will be able to view that case. Generally speaking, you only need to specify a user's value or a roles value, since specifying both can be redundant. Even if the users and roles columns are going to be completely blank for all cases, you still need to include those cases in your case management server dataset, since they are used to help identify the server dataset as a case management server dataset. Finally, we have the sort by property. Normally, cases are displayed to enumerators in order based on their ID value. But if your cases have a sort by value, they will be sorted and displayed based on that instead. In the example on the right, all three of these cases will be grouped together since they have a sort by value of 2. There are a few settings you can use to customize what the case management menu looks like. On this slide, there are 2 screenshots from SurveyCTO Collect. On the left, we have the tree list view. The large bold text is the case label, and when the enumerator taps on the case label, it will open up and show the forms assigned to that case, which they can tap on to open and fill it out. On the right, we have the table view, where cases are shown as rows in the table instead. When you tap on a row in the table, it will go to a new screen and list the forms for that case. You can specify which columns appear in the case management table. Changing these settings is really easy. Here is the case management server dataset we created earlier. Simply click Settings, and you can change the appearance from the tree list appearance to the table appearance and back. When table is selected, you can change which columns will be displayed in that table using these buttons over here. And click Save when you're done. Case management server datasets are server datasets, so you can add and update cases just like you would a normal server dataset. To add or edit cases, you can upload a CSV file or a spreadsheet data file, use dataset publishing, or edit the server dataset manually. I'll show you an example uploading a data file. Here is a spreadsheet file I made earlier. At the top, we have the case management columns, ID, label, form IDs, users, roles, and sort by. Below that header row, I have several cases, each with an ID, label, and form IDs values. Each ID value is unique, so each case has all of the needed properties. I have also added some other values in other columns, but those are the three that are required. Here is the case management server dataset we created earlier. I'll click Upload, select that file stored on my computer, and click Upload down here. The file was successfully uploaded. All right, we're all set. I'll refresh the page so I can view the latest changes. And if I go to that server dataset and click Edit, I can see the cases that were just added. Now that we know how to create cases, we'll briefly discuss how to use case management. Enumerators can view cases from the case management menu. In SurveyCTO Collect, this is turned off by default, but you can turn it on from the admin settings. Here is the main menu in SurveyCTO Collect with Manage Cases menu hidden. Tap the three-dot menu in the upper right. Tap Admin Settings. And under User Can Access main menu items, turn on Manage Cases. When I return to the main menu, the Manage Cases menu is now available. It may be a good idea to use a default device configuration, so this is turned on by default for enumerators, which you can learn about more in our documentation. In order to fill out a form from a case, it still needs to be downloaded to the device. Enumerators can do this from the Get Blank Form menu, but you can also set up a default device configuration that automatically downloads the needed blank forms to the device. For web forms, as long as there is a case management server dataset with viewable cases, then the Manage Cases menu will be available, as well as all deployed forms the user normally has access to. Once you open the Manage Cases menu, you will be able to view the cases assigned to you, as well as the cases assigned to everyone. To start a form from a case, tap the case, tap a form, and fill it out. If a blank form needs to be downloaded to the device, it will say in red that the form needs to be downloaded. You can tap on that red text to be brought to the Get Blank Form menu to download that form. When a form is complete, it will appear in green under Finalized Forms, as you can see in this screenshot. Now that we know how to set up case management and fill out forms for cases, let's talk about some more advanced workflows you can set up. Before, we mentioned that when a form is opened from a case, the ID of the case is stored in the form. The ID value is stored in the form field with the name case ID. During data analysis, you can use that to associate different forms from the same case. For example, in this screenshot, we have a submission for the form called Household Week 1. We can see that the case ID value of this form is HH-1001. When the form for week 2 is opened from the same case, we will know those submissions are related since they will both have a case ID value of HH-1001. Case management server datasets are server datasets, and just like other SurveyCTO server datasets, they can store all sorts of data and you can publish data to them. Before, we mentioned that the case management server datasets must include 5 specific columns. However, you can add other columns to the server dataset as well. For example, in this server dataset, we have the typical ID, label, form IDs, users, roles, and sort by columns. However, we also have columns for the name of the household head and their phone number. Remember, when a form is opened from a case, the ID value will be stored in the field case ID. Because of that, you can use it as the unique identifier in expressions used for preloading. For example, let's say we open this case, which has an ID value of HH-1001, and we open a form from that case. The field case ID will also have a value of HH-1001, so we can use that as a unique identifier in a preloading expression to retrieve data from this dataset row. We can use that case ID value to retrieve the household name, their phone number, and whatever else is stored in the server dataset. Just because a form is used in a case, it does not mean the form can automatically use data from that case. To allow a form to preload data from a server dataset, go to the server dataset, click Attach, select the forms you would like to attach, and you're all set. Now, those forms can use data from this server dataset, such as the household head and their phone number. If you're not familiar with preloading, check out the webinar we did a while ago on preloading data. I will share the link to that at the end of this webinar. You can also publish data to the case management server dataset to update the case with new information. For example, in this server dataset, there's a column called num calls, short for number of calls so far. This is the form assigned to that case. Here, there's a field called num calls, which uses the field case ID to retrieve the value of the column with the same name. Or it has a value of 0 if that column is blank. Then there's another field in the form called call num, which takes the value of num calls and adds 1 to it. For example, if there were previously 2 calls so far, this field will add 1 to store a value of 3. We can set up the form so that this field, call num, publishes to the num calls column of the server dataset. That way, each time the form is filled out and submitted, the num calls value increases by 1, and data managers can easily keep track of the number of calls so far for each case. This kind of workflow can be a major part of computer-assisted telephone interviewing, or CATI. We will demonstrate how to set up dataset publishing a bit later. Keep in mind that in order to know how many calls have been made so far, the form needs to have the latest dataset data, and it needs to publish its own data as soon as the form instance is finalized. Otherwise, the data may not be updated correctly. For this reason, it is important to turn on all of the auto send/receive settings. On this device in SurveyCTO Collect, I will tap the 3-dot menu in the upper right and tap General Settings. I'll scroll down to the auto send/receive settings and turn on all of them. That way, as soon as the form instance is finalized, it will be submitted to the server and it will update the server dataset. Then, when the form is opened again, it will retrieve the latest dataset data from the server so it can use the new data that was just published. A cool trick you can do with cases is hide them from enumerators when they are done. That way, you can still see information about each case in the case management server dataset, but enumerators cannot fill out forms for that case. We do this by publishing closed or something along those lines to the users or roles column of the case we want to close. Because there is no user or user role called closed, no user will be able to view that case from the case management menu. In this form called Household Week 1, there's a field called Users, which retrieves the value of the users column from the server dataset. Down here, we have the field Pub to Users, which, just like the name implies, publishes to the users column of the server dataset. By default, the field's value is the same as the user's value, as the user's field. But if this case is supposed to be closed, as determined by the field Now Complete, it publishes closed to the users column of the server dataset. That way, if the case should still be open, it republishes the list of users back to that column, effectively making no change. But if the case should be closed, it will publish closed to the users column of the server dataset. That way, the case will no longer be visible to any enumerators. Let's set up dataset publishing. The form we were just looking at has already been deployed to the server. Down here, we have the case management server dataset we created earlier with the data that was recently uploaded. Let's set up the connection between the form and the server dataset. For that server dataset, I'll click Publish Into, then Add a Form. From this drop-down menu, I'll select the form, Household Week 1. To add a field that will publish to the server dataset, click the Add button. On the left, you will select the form field, and on the right, you select the column header that it will publish to. For the first field, I'll select Case ID and set that to publish to the ID column of the server dataset, connecting the two unique identifiers. Next, I'll click the Add button again, and for the form field, I'll select Pub to Users. And for the server dataset column, I'll select Users. That way, the Pub to Users field publishes to the Users column of the server dataset. Now, the value of the field Case ID will publish to the ID column, and the value of the field Pub to Users will publish to the Users column. We want to make sure that we update the corresponding row of the server dataset instead of just adding a new row. So for the form field to identify unique records, we'll select that field, Case ID. That way, if the value of the field Case ID already exists in the ID column of the server dataset, it will update that row instead of adding a new row. Finally, we'll click Save, and we're all set. When the submitted form indicates that the case should be closed, it will publish closed to the users column of the server dataset. Let's see this in action. If you look at the case Devi family, it has a user's value enumerator 1. Here I am logged in as enumerator 1. So the case appears on top. I'll open that case and open the first form assigned to that case. This field asks, should this case be closed? I'll select yes and submit the form instance. I'll refresh this page. And now that that is published, if we look at the case from before, we can see it now has a user's value of closed. Sure enough, when we return to the case management menu, that case is no longer listed since it has now been closed. You don't necessarily have to publish closed to the users column. You can publish audit, on hold, or whatever else is needed for your project. It can be anything that is not an actual username. You can also publish to the roles column. If the user's username is listed in the users column, but the roles column has a different user role, then the case will still be hidden from them. And of course, you can publish other fields to the form as well. Before, we discussed using dataset publishing to keep track of the number of calls. Let's go back to the case management server dataset and set that up. For the server dataset, I'll click Publish Into. And for the form from before, I'll click Edit. You can see the dataset publishing from before, but let's add another field here. I'll click Add. The field with the updated number of calls is called Call Num, so I'll select that. And I want to publish to the num calls column, so I'll select that. Click Save. And we're all set. Now the server dataset will be updated with the number of calls so far. Lastly, before we move on to the Q&A, I would like to tell you about the next event in our webinar series, which will be on estimating the size of hidden populations, and it will be co-hosted by NORC at the University of Chicago. NORC is a public research organization at the University of Chicago. NORC is undertaking research on commercial sexual exploitation in Kenya, which is important research, but with a population like this, drawing a representative random sample isn't possible. In this webinar, we will discuss how to find and collect data using respondent-driven sampling, or RDS, and we will discuss how to adjust for bias and referral-based sampling. You can take a look at our blog now, where you can register for this webinar. Thank you for attending this webinar.